there is this gap that exists between where our ideal customer, where our potential customer can be with us and where they would be without us. And we want to just help them identify that. And that's really sales and marketing, is us helping them to see that, right? And we want to be the bridge between those two.
I quickly realized that it was an interesting market where one party had the buying decision, which is the parents. Your actual clients are the students, and you need to make both of them happy. Every parent wants the best for their kids. That is not unique to any individual family. I quickly realized that what we were selling, wasn't tutoring services. It was peace of mind for the parents of knowing, hey, we're doing the best for our kids. And that goes into what I've been recommending to entrepreneurs to do now in this COVID environment, which is do journey mapping again for your clients, because especially now, consumer spending habits have changed and your value proposition may not align with your target demographic as much as it did 2 or 3 months ago. And so you need to really do journey mapping and figure out what is the client actually buying from you.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me for another Growth Secrets interview. I'm here with Lee Elberson, who is the owner and operator for Claiborne, as well as a few other organizations. And so I'm excited to hear about all of that. Lee's a true entrepreneur, as you can tell. And so we're going to learn a lot from him. You guys are going to really enjoy this conversation. So Lee, thank you so much for joining me.
Happy to be here. Thanks so much. Thanks so much for having me on your show, Reed. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, let's start by talking about you. Tell us about your background. What's brought you to this point in your career?
All right. I'll try to keep this concise and not go on too long. So I think, when I think back about my journey to being an entrepreneur, I think my story is somewhat unique, but it's not completely unique to entrepreneurs. I had a tough time understanding what success meant when I was younger, and that includes in my 20s. And I quickly, sort of early on, realized that structure was a big part of being successful. And so I sort of had this idea that, hey, I'm going to join the Marine Corps. That's going to give me structure. Could be career options there. Great. And then not shortly after I was in the Marines, I understood that structure was a prerequisite, but that I needed something that really aligned with my passion. Another thing I really learned in the Marine Corps is like what inefficiency means in an organization, and how when you scale, that inefficiency seems to like increase exponentially. And so then I spent the next few years, chasing down my passions. And my decade in academia was spent in experimental physics. I always loved solving problems and board games, and so that was a natural fit. But I, sort of had this thought that when I was working at a national lab level that I wasn't truly fulfilled, because I wanted to work with people, right? You don't really interact with a whole lot of people when you're working at national lab research. And so then I was a professional poker player for a year, and quickly understood the difference between a hobby and a job, right? Like playing poker with your friends on the weekend is a lot of fun. Doing it as a job is much different. And so I think finally, after all those years, I sort of understood the Venn diagram that to me equals success. And that is that if my passion and what I do for money overlap as much as possible, that to me is success. And financial outcome is obviously always great. It can solve some problems, but that was not a key marker for success for me. And so I ultimately ended up with that passion alignment, where I'm, owning a tutoring company where I'm helping as many kids get to the next stage as possible. And then in a consulting capacity, helping businesses grow through an organization called Community Investment Collaborative, and helping my brother grow his company, which is 8 Hats. And so I have never looked back once I sort of found that alignment, and so haven't been happier. So that's a little bit about my story. Hopefully it's not too long.
No, that's really great. I always like to hear about, the unique paths that have brought us to where we are. And I've done I mentioned before we started recording that I've had almost 70 interviews at this point. And over the course of my career, I mean, I've talked to hundreds of business leaders and entrepreneurs, and there's something to learn from each one of those experiences. It's one of the impetuses for starting this podcast. So I appreciate you doing that. Um, I I completely resonate with the idea of having what you enjoy doing and what makes money, finding that overlap. I think we tend to go too far one way or the other too often, where we feel like we have to choose we'll do this thing that pays the bills, or we're choosing a life of poverty, right? But that doesn't have to be the case, right? You'll probably have to make some compromises both ways. Maybe you don't, but it's different than having to choose totally one or the other. So that totally resonates. I really appreciate that. Um, Segue a little bit to the identification of the business opportunity. So you're clearly a well-educated guy. You're a thinking man. You're a thinker. I imagine you came to the decision to start this business and these businesses with some study, right? And so I'm always curious how you came to identify this opportunity and what made you what caused you to wake up one day and say there's got to be a better way to do X, and so I'm going to go and build that better solution.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think I'll just sort of, reiterate what you said about like having to make the choice between, oh, I'm going to be a, starving artist, or I've got to be an investment banker, right? And those, it's not those two ends of the spectrum. I think when you find your passion, selling becomes much more organic. I remember I sold those Cutco knives when I was in high school, and I remember thinking, I'm not a good salesman because I didn't really have passion for it, and I wasn't bought into it. But now that I'm really bought into my passion, sales is very easy for me. I'm probably the best salesman in the company because I don't sell anything. I just resonate with what people's needs are, and then articulate what our company offers. And I think that to me is true sales. And so I think, recognizing a need in the community, or recognizing a need in the business world, came after I figured out I was really good at tutoring. So I think when I realized that that was my personal passion, is helping people, I started to look at, well, why do people buy tutoring? Why would you pay for this service when you could just do it yourself? Um, and in sort of exploring what people are actually buying, there was a lot of realizations there. At the surface I thought, oh well, I've got to sell to students. I quickly realized, especially for high school students, they don't make the decision. The parents make the decision. Most of the kids would not be in tutoring unless their parents told them to do it, or they had to pay to do it, or they told, yeah, or that their parents were paying them to go. So I quickly realized that it was an interesting market where one party had the buying decision, which is the parents. Your actual clients are the students, and you need to make both of them happy. And so then if we're selling to the parents, what is their true mission, right? I think every parent wants the best for their kids. That is not unique to any individual family. And so in some ways, a parent is always going to be limited in what they can help their student with academically. Even if a parent has 5 PhDs in all of the major colleges, it's going to be really difficult to tutor your own kid because you can't dissociate that parent and student relationship. And so, I quickly realized that what we were selling, wasn't tutoring services. It was peace of mind for the parents of knowing, hey, we're doing the best for our kids. And that goes into what I've been recommending to entrepreneurs to do now in this COVID environment, which is do journey mapping again for your clients. Because especially now, consumer spending habits have changed, and your value proposition may not align with your target demographic as much as it did 2 or 3 months ago. And so you need to really do journey mapping and figure out what is the client actually buying from you. And I think that many times in my cases, there's been a very big surprise of, oh, we're not, you're not selling the service, or for a product business, you're not selling this product, you're actually selling a feeling, or you're selling some sort of experience. So anyway, that was a big part of, why I came to start my own tutoring. Well, why I came to start my own tutoring company and then merge with my now business partner for Claiborne. And so that's been a journey, but that's been part of it.
Well, so you talk about something really interesting there. In there's there's a gap, right? There's a gap. There's always this gap that exists between our customers' ideal outcome and where they are, and where kind of the other end of the coin, the opposite end of the coin, if they don't use our solution. That gap always exists, right? If I go to the car lot, if I buy this truck, my life is going to look like X. If I don't buy the truck, my life's going to look like Y. I want my life to look like X. I don't realize yet that the gap is this particular truck that this guy is trying to sell me, right? Now, that's a way oversimplified explanation of it, but just to really put it into something we can all relate to. Everybody wants to buy a truck, right? No, that's just me. That's fine. But there is this gap that exists between where our ideal customer, where our potential customer can be with us, and where they would be without us. And we want to just help them identify that. And that's really sales and marketing, is us helping them to see that, right? And we want to be the bridge between those two. And so you talk about that, and you do a good job at explaining that, especially when it comes to the relationship that parents have with their children in that tutoring environment, right? And I'll use another oversimplified example. My son's 5. My oldest is 5. It's really difficult for me to try to teach him, especially when it comes to his schoolwork, right? Because it's difficult for me to get in that mindset. I mean, heck, it was tough for me to teach him t-ball, right? Because I wanted to just say, go to first base. And he doesn't know which is first, third. He doesn't know what a base is, right? And so to really just forget everything that I'd learned over, 30 years, and then put myself in that perspective is difficult. And so where I want this outcome to exist, where he learns this sport, he loves it, or he learns this subject in school and he loves it, it's difficult for me to create that. So the bridge there is actually, in this case, it's a tutoring service, or it's a coach. So I wanted to put some legs around that idea, because I think that's really helpful for the audience to be able to see, okay, how can I create that bridge between my customers' potential outcome with me, which is the best case scenario, right? And the potential outcome without me, which is the worst case scenario. So I appreciate you pointing that out.
Yeah, if I could just piggyback on again, I
Yeah.
swear I won't be too long, but yeah, I think that's why I always say that if you find something that you're really passionate about, that gap is essentially experience, right? If you take Malcolm Gladwell's estimate, like 10,000 hours, the reason why people would pay for me to tutor their kids is they're not going to spend 10,000 hours seeing all of the tricks that it takes to get them from point A to point B. They're paying for my experience to help fast track that process, because sure, they could certainly take 10,000 hours, but they probably don't have that much time. And so we will get there faster and we will get farther. And that's essentially what you're paying for. And so the same thing is true with like a web hosting company. People could start their own website, they could do their own servicing, but they're paying for somebody who always knows what to do. And again, it's that peace of mind of knowing, okay, the expert's got it taken care of. And so again, I think when you're in a business that you're very passionate about, that sort of sales comes out organically.
Yeah, I completely agree. I was talking to my wife about this earlier, and we were just saying that when you have that thing that really gets you going, you can't stop talking about it. It'll get you up out of bed in the morning. It'll get you excited, and that's all of the drive, if you will, that's needed to motivate you to do some of the parts of sales that's not quite as fun, right? There's just going to be a lot of rejection in it, but if you're excited about it, if you're passionate about it, makes it a whole lot easier. So that I think is a good transition point to talk about the second job of an entrepreneur, of a business leader. After identifying and creating a solution to a problem, it's getting that into the hands of as many people as possible, right? And so, what does the growth strategy look like for Claiborne and perhaps your other businesses? What does the marketing system look like for you guys?
Yes. So growth strategy, I think, at our organization and probably with many organizations, it certainly happens in the sort of data collection and planning process, which probably happens at the C-suite level and in the executive level and maybe VP level. And then it comes on the execution level, which is, like you said, probably the marketing department. But honestly, messaging should be company wide, right? You want to make sure that whatever the sales team is messaging to the clients, your employees are messaging amongst themselves and when they interact with the clients. And so I think my biggest piece of advice is, just spend a lot of time understanding your industry, right? LinkedIn groups are a great way to connect with people in your industry. That's how you and I got connected. That's how I connect with a lot of CEOs of bigger companies. When we think about growth strategy, I always tell people find CEOs that are in companies bigger than yours, even much bigger than yours. And you'd be surprised at how many times they will take your meeting. I mean, I've talked with people in the test prep industry and they run $100 million companies. Why would they talk to somebody who runs $1 million company, right? It's, a lot of it is that people, I think, when they have information as an entrepreneur, you do want to relay that, even if it is with a competitor. Not to mention, there's a secondary benefit if an acquisition is in your exit strategy, then preparing yourself to understand a bigger business, if they have a roll-up strategy, hey, what can I do to position myself for an acquisition, right? And even more than that, they understand what it takes to grow the company. So I think, reaching out to as many CEOs and C-suite people in your industry is great. And then, once you gather that information, I think something that's come out of this COVID environment that's been really good for our business is we use Slack now more than ever. And so there's a lot of intercompany communication. And so everyone is always aware of where the company is headed. I think there's many books that talk about this, Good to Great, and a number of others that say, if everybody in the company is not pointed in the right direction, you you have to get the wrong people off the bus, right? You have to get the right people on, the wrong people off. And so making sure that you communicate with this or across the company lets people speak up if they don't agree with what you're talking about, because there's a lot of people in my company that'll mention things and I think, wow, that's really good point. We shouldn't offer this for free. We should charge for this. Do you have any thoughts on how? And we get a lot of different feedback. People that maybe work at a university and say, this is how we distribute curriculum. Maybe we could do this at Claiborne. And so I think that's been a big part of our growth strategy, is making sure that before things get launched in marketing or other initiative, we mention it company wide to help flesh out all the details. Now, obviously, sometimes you want to do that in layers. You don't want to open it up to a 200-person company and say, give feedback, right? You roll it out into various departments. But that's been very helpful for our internal strategy. In terms of external, I think I've already spoken about this, but the education world, especially higher education, is in a lot of turmoil right now. We're talking about $1 trillion industry, and it's terrifying to think that 20% of incoming students may not go to college. I mean, what does a university do if they have to do 20% cuts, right? That's terrifying for them. And so we need to think about how we adapt. If our value proposition was to help students make it to the next step, What if that next step doesn't include an SAT or doesn't include college admissions or even a community college? Then what is our value proposition? How, like, what, maybe they're not clients anymore. Um, and so I think we have to determine, do do we think that this COVID change is going to be permanent, or is this just a 1 year thing? Is next year, are we going to have an equilibration point that goes somewhat back to the way it used to be? I honestly don't think so for the education industry, and I don't think many industries are going to go all the way back. I think now we've just escalated what virtual learning does and virtual engagements do. And so we're trying to think, how much do we pivot? Like, we don't want to over course correct and say, oh, we have to target this virtual learning, because in a year, it's not all going to be virtual learning. There's going to be some in-person sessions. And so we need to think, oh, we need to course correct just enough. And we don't know what that just enough is. That's why you have to talk to industry leaders. And this is why we spend a lot of time talking to our clients, right? Tell us, what is your thought process, right? What are you thinking about for the next steps? And that really helps us with our marketing efforts. Sorry for that long-winded
No,
answer.
no,
Hopefully I
that's
answered your question.
no, yeah, you definitely, and I love the perspective both on the internal side and the external side. Most people tend to answer that question just with the external, but talking about how we create content and how we roll out initiatives before they even go external. That's great insight. To your second point, I'll say that I tend to agree that I don't expect that life's just going to go back to normal. Um, I don't think it'll stay like this forever, right? I mean, I think we're going to, like I was talking to another interview guest we had earlier, and I mean, I said two things. One, I can't wait to go and sit down at a restaurant again. That's going to be a great day. And I can't wait to have another. I'm a natural extrovert, so I'm looking forward to meeting with people face to face again. But it's going to be really difficult for anyone to ignore the efficiencies gained by, you know, doing that call as a Zoom call instead of driving across town. Or I know for a lot of people in traditional corporate environments that have been driving to work every day and crammed into an office building, they're going to have a lot of conversations with employers, and they're going to say, "This last few months worked out fine for me." And the employers are going to say, we could probably cut our overhead by a nice little chunk, a nice little sliver, if we allow people to work from home. They're just as productive as they were before, if not more. And then on the higher education side, or just the education side in general, yeah, I think that one is the most primed. Has probably been the most primed for disruption for a while anyway. And so I had made the joke before, and I don't know if this is right on, but my sons, I have two boys, they're 5 and 2. I've said for a while that I would expect them to graduate from a college one day that they never actually set foot on that campus, right? I would expect a sort of a democratization of higher education where we still are able to have some sort of a hybrid model. And I'm talking way out of my field of knowledge, but just kind of looking at the trends and extrapolating and then really just guessing beyond that. But I think it's really it's interesting to hear from you who is on the front line, who are on the front lines of this, and I imagine you'll be hard at work in figuring things out as the developments come in. So that's a neat perspective. I appreciate that as well.
Yeah, one more little addition to that, to think even farther, an even crazier scenario for your boys is that they might gain a number of credits from various institutions that is then qualify them for a job that is not attached to a specific university, right? Like, I don't see that happening. I think the higher education system, it's too big of a system to change in maybe 15 years, but that is certainly a possibility, that you gain accreditation and projects, project-based learning environments, and that helps prepare you better for a position. That would always be my goal. I think within one institution, there's a lot more to college than the classes, right? I think the peer learning is the main thing that's missing right now. If you think about why you pay for college, the classes alone don't do it. It's learning from your peers. It's meeting and learning from different perspectives. And so I think that's what's really missing.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree, and I would point you, and I'd point the reader, I mean, the listeners and the viewers to an interview that I did with Barrett Bogue a few weeks ago. He did a lot of work developing kind of the new GI Bill, and so we talked a lot about higher education and adult learners, specifically in the context of people in the military or transitioning out of the military, and how that has already been changing higher education, but how the future of higher education is going to change because of that. And of course, these other outside forces. And he said exactly what you just mentioned, that we're likely to see someone graduating from college with 9 different universities on the diploma, right? Because they've gathered credits online here and there, and they've taken a longer time to finish, perhaps because they're working. I think the economics of the situation is probably going to drive people into, and the rising costs of education are likely to drive people into doing school on more of a part-time basis. But I'm with you, Lee. I think it's going to be really interesting to see what it looks like over the next 13 years before my oldest is in college, and about 15 or 16 years before my youngest, and beyond that. So I think you are as well primed as any to be on the forefront and on the cutting edge of what happens. So I'm excited to see how you guys develop. What is a way, speaking of, that people can follow you guys and keep in touch and learn about what all you guys are doing?
Yeah. So if they want to learn more about Claiborne, you can just go to our website. We have a newsletter sign up at the bottom of the page. We release newsletters a couple times a month, and we've started to do a Facebook Live series to just answer questions, about college admissions, about standardized tests, and more generally just what's happening in the school systems. So that's a great way to get in touch with us. Like, go, join the newsletter and follow us on Facebook.
Sounds great. And we'll definitely leave links to that in the comments. And speaking of the comments, folks, you know the drill. If you've been following this podcast, if you're watching this live, leave a comment down below that says live. If you're watching the replay later on, that's great too. Matter of fact, we're seeing from the data, a lot of you are watching on the replays. Just leave us a comment that says replay down below and give us some feedback. I'd love to hear what you guys are thinking of these interviews. If you have questions for Lee, please leave them there as well. I'll be sure to have Lee. You're more than welcome to join the Facebook group if you haven't already. We'd love for you to be able to interact with the folks throughout. Just be a part of this community. We'd love for it. And for everybody who's watching this at home, we really appreciate you joining us today. As always, Lee, thank you so much for your time. Everyone, we will see you on the next interview. Thanks so much.